All right, welcome everyone to Elevate Earth and this wonderful city of Tahoe City. My first time here, so I'm really excited to be here for this wonderful event organized by the Killian Jornet Foundation and Normal, head of Western States. And we put these events on to give athletes a chance to engage with some of the problems and some of the solutions that we're facing when it comes to the climate change going forward. And we really believe that having an audience and having a niche like the outdoor world is really important when it comes to battling climate change for many, many reasons. But let me give you an insight of how we do that. So I run something along with a guy that you might know called Killian Jornet, called the Athlete Climate Academy. We do podcasts and education series and videos, all to give athletes an insight and more information if they want to talk about climate change, sustainability, intersectionality, public lands, all that kind of stuff. Because we really believe that the outdoor world want to engage in this kind of thing, but sometimes without the tools to do so, which is why we have many really great guests here who are helping athletes engage in this kind of world. So on Athlete Climate Academy, you can do a course in renewable energies or in how plastic pollution works, all that kind of stuff. We've got experiments for schools on there, all to educate the world in terms of climate change. And that's what we truly believe in, is that education will, quote unquote, save the world. I partnered with the Killian Jornet Foundation on this, and the Killian Jornet Foundation, started by Killian Jornet, was designed to use his platform and the platform of athletes around the world to create a movement, really, to start looking at the outdoor industry and what we can do differently and what we can do better, but also what people who just go into the outdoors can do as well. And through that, they partnering with scientists, partnering with communicators, partnering with journalists to make sure that we tackle the climate change in the best possible way that we can. So at today's event, we've got some really great guests for you. But I wanted to lay the platform of what climate change is before we start getting into that. And one of the things that I truly believe is that we've got off trail. It's happened quite a lot. Sometimes in some quite important races, we get off trail and we need to find our way back on. We started going off trail when it came to climate change a long time ago, hundreds of years ago. We started to make moves in a direction that we needed to turn back from, and forces outside most of our control meant we couldn't really get back onto that. And it's made a lot of things difficult. So on our little planet that we circle the sun in, there's lots of different factors that change how hot, how cold, what the climate is like. And they're called climate forcing factors. And some of them are natural, absolutely. There's one big one that's not natural, and that's fossil fuels. We've put them into the environment at a rate that we probably shouldn't have. And that means that we start to change the climate, and it turns out there's some bad things that go along with that as well. So some of the ways that our climate is changing, because we put more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, is the atmosphere itself. Getting warmer year in, year out, on average 1.2 degrees higher than it was back when the Industrial Revolution started. But that's just on average around the world. Athletes around the world would have seen that in mountainous environments, we're at 2 degrees higher than normal. Because of something called Arctic amplification, in places like the Arctic and Antarctic, that's more like 4 degrees above normal. So we're changing the atmosphere and how it's made up. We get more things like acid rain, we get a warming, and we get things changing. For our waterways, we've started seeing that fresh water and access to fresh water is changing all around the world. In places like the Himalaya, 1 billion people rely on the water towers that sit high above in the Himalaya. In Europe, 40% of all of Europe get its fresh water from the Alpine region and the glaciers and the water towers that sit there. Water is starting to change, not only high up in the mountains, but how we get it as fresh water down by the coast as well. So that's changing too. In terms of our oceans, the majority of the warming that we've seen around the world has been absorbed by our oceans. So we don't even get to see most of the warming. We don't get to see most of the carbon dioxide because that's been taken on by the oceans as well. It's causing acidification in the oceans, and it's causing a rise in sea levels as well, both from the more water going into it, but also from a thermal expansion of the water as well. When you heat water up, it expands, and that's rising with sea levels as well. So they're changing too. At the poles, we're just seeing less and less ice, both at the Antarctic and the Arctic as well. We're looking at an ice-free summer in the Arctic by about 2030. It means that there are fewer and fewer expeditions going to the North Pole. But it does mean that one day we will just sail around the North Pole, and that might be fun. And in terms of biodiversity, we're losing species at a rate of about 200 to 2,000 species every single year. We're seeing that they just continue to drop. And really important ones like pollinators, but also macrofauna, big mammals and things are starting to decline, but all the little ones as well. You'll notice when you drive your car around, there are fewer insects on your windscreen. That's because there's just fewer insects around now, and that's only a bad thing. The ice is starting to disappear. As we know, when we spend time in the mountains, we see the ice starting to go away, whether that's glaciers, whether that's ice caps. If you've been to places like Iceland, where this is, or you live anywhere near a glacier, you'll see that it starts to recede. And 97 or 8% of the glaciers around the world are receding. There's like one or two really weird ones, like in Patagonia, that do advance a little, but not enough to change really what's happening. So the ice is starting to disappear. And when I said earlier on about water towers, those water towers are these things that deliver, like water batteries, fresh water to everything downstream of it. So when we lose these, we'll lose that. And we'll also lose something called the albedo effect, where as sun's rays come down to Earth, a lot of them bounce back out into space because of the icy nature of the white nature of the ice. And also the snowpack as well. That does the same thing. It bounces light rays back into space. So when we lose snowpack and we lose ice, things get darker because the rocks underneath are darker, and that'll cause more heating up as well. It's really happy talk so far, right? We've got some good solutions to come, because tackling the problem, you should always tackle the problem closest to you. So we've got some really, really good examples of how people are starting to tackle the problems that are closest to them in their community and in their countries and in the surrounding environments. Because we are, at the end of the day, just individual people. But what we want to do is tackle everything that's closest to us first, and then we can start getting further away from where we are with that. Wonderful. So you'll have noticed when I did my first part, my very downbeaten, boring talk at the start, it covered almost every single part of the world, right? It covered the ice part of the world, the cryosphere, it covered the oceans, it covered the land. And that's because the climate change touches everything, but also climate change touches everyone. So you'll notice then from Zoe's talk that the people that she talks about are people that live in communities around us, but also in quite far-reaching and communities that are on the other side of the world, sometimes in quite localized areas and things. So working directly with communities is one of the most important things that we can do. And Zoe and Runners for Public Land do that really well, but also another organization that does that really well and gives the opportunity for athletes to work with those communities directly is Footprints Running Camp. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Dakota Jones and Dr. Brianna Pagán.
Well, hello everybody. Thank you so much for having us up here. My name is Dakota Jones. I'm a professional trail runner. I run for Normal, one of the sponsors of this event. And I am from Salt Lake City now. I grew up in Colorado, and I've been running ultramarathons since I was in high school, actually. I'm proud I have a streak going still that I've run at least one ultramarathon every year since 2008. And, you know, I grew up in Southwest Colorado, and I got inspired to become an ultra runner at the Hard Rock 100 in 2008. And ever since then, this is what I wanted to do, and I've really dedicated my life to that. And it's been really fun. I've gotten to travel the world, and it's been a really amazing experience. But, you know, over the years, I've really become super conscious of my own environmental impact, and I've tried to learn more about climate change and other environmental issues. And this has become a really, really important component of my personal life and also my professional life. How can I use the platform that I have as a professional athlete to promote these education and action for environmental issues like climate change? And so in 2021, I and some other friends founded an organization called Footprints. And Footprints is basically, it's a running camp. We bring people together for a week in the mountains, and everybody who comes has some sort of climate action project that they want to address in their community. And they say, this is how climate action is affecting the place I live or the people I live with or my family, my friends, whoever. And this is how I want to address it. And we get all these experts to try to come and help them develop personal climate action projects. And when I started this project, what I envisioned was, we need to stop climate change. We need to remove CO2 from the atmosphere. And so what we need to do is we need to get these climate scientists to come here and teach us how to do that and what the problem is. And it's been an interesting journey ever since then. But I want to introduce now Dr. Brianna Pagán, who is, by any measure, the ideal mentor for Footprints, because you are a climate scientist, but you are so much more. So tell us more.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Dakota. And yeah, nice to see everyone. So I currently work at NASA at one of the data centers. I'm a deputy manager, about a team about 70 people who are half software engineers, half sort of your traditional domain climate scientists. And we work to take data from satellites and give it out to the public, give it out to researchers. But my career trajectory is not super linear, and I also started as, a more typical climate scientist. I'm born and raised here in Southern California, and originally started working in the water conservation space, worked at a local water government agency, and probably like most people who end up in a climate career, you're always wondering, like, what's more? Like, this didn't feel enough. So my first job, I just thought, this isn't enough. This is just like one tiny town, and I want to have a bigger impact. So I ended up going back to grad school and sort of specializing in climate modeling for hydrology applications. So some of my first research was trying to model actually the Sierra Nevada watersheds to understand how water issues were going to be changing in the future here in California. And even that felt not enough. It felt like, here in the Western US, we've known these issues for a long time. This isn't a science problem, it's really a policy issue, and I want to have an even bigger impact. And I ended up moving on to Europe and studying abroad to do my PhD, working at international level climate issues and getting to do projects in different countries, Belgium, France, India. And I think, ironically, I ended up coming back here to the US working at NASA. And I've sort of come full circle of realizing I always thought about this the wrong way, where I kept asking just my individual self, right? Like, what can I do? Like, I want to do more. I want to have the biggest impact. And that's an exhaustive state of being. And I was thinking about it wrong because I can only know so much. Doesn't matter how many degrees or accolades I have. I will never know all the solutions. And I was never thinking of myself as a person in an ecosystem or a person in a community. And I started leaning back on what is community and trying to find community. And I've always identified as a runner. More recently, I started doing ultra running in the past 2 or 3 years. And now I have found ultra running as part of like my community and starting to see, just a lot of overlap in what we're trying to do in the climate space and building community. And feel like I came at this inflection point of meeting Dakota at a similar time, maybe in our lives, of feeling like I want to do more. It's beyond me. How do I build something? Running is a part of me. How can I integrate that in climate? And yeah, maybe you can talk about like your journey into the ultra running space or your background in that, how you got here.
Yeah, thanks for that. So like I said, I started running ultra marathons in high school, and that's because I grew up in Durango, Colorado, which is this beautiful place in Southwest Colorado, really close to where they hold the Hard Rock 100. And with my dad, I was always hiking and climbing in the mountains, and so I had this really strong kind of outdoor awareness and all these opportunities to go out in the mountains. And I especially remember when I first volunteered at Hard Rock. I was 17 years old, and the past few years, I had actually moved from one school to another, and so like making friends had been kind of hard. And once I volunteered at Hard Rock and got to know the ultra running community, I immediately felt like accepted and embraced in a really, really powerful way. And that sense of community was extremely just uplifting. It was really powerful, and it gave me a lot back then. And that is one of the things that I've carried forward with ultra running ever since. Because of course I'm competitive and I want to win races and I love all these opportunities to see the world. But I've always really tried to focus on like the why of what I'm here for. And it's like being out in the mountains, having these adventures, and really embracing the community and the people that I share this with. But one thing that I've really started to understand over the past few years is that a lot of the community around me looks a lot like me. And this is not a coincidence. You know, people in the outdoor industry tend to have the means to, and the energy and the time and the money to go out to not work at a time, to not take care of their family or friends. You know, we're able to go out into the mountains and use incredible amounts of energy to run 100 miles. I'm going to run 100 miles this weekend at Western States. And, you know, I grew up with these opportunities, and this is something I'm incredibly grateful for. But it's also something that I really need to acknowledge. And until recently, I don't think I did acknowledge that the opportunities I've had are really opportunities that most people don't have. And for example, the reason I've been able to be a professional trail runner is because, you know, when I was in my early 20s, I was poor, I was a dirtbag living in my truck, but I also had a tremendous safety net with my family. And so I could take these risks and run these races and not make a lot of money for a while as I established myself. Most people in the world don't have these opportunities. And so when I think about building community, I want to do it through the trail running sphere, like you mentioned. You know, I am a trail runner and I have this strong community, but I don't just want to support people who already have the means and the opportunities. And I really want to provide the same opportunities I've had to as many people as possible. And this is something that I've really started to learn is critical for climate change in general, because climate change is not really the problem. It's more a symptom of a larger problem of inequality in our society. And at this point, what I realize is that I'm not really the person to lead on this issue in a big way. I need to ask for help. And so it's been really interesting getting to know you, because you have a very different background and perspective on this. And if you're willing to share, it'd be really interesting to hear how you feel.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I mentioned earlier that running's always been a part of my life. I did run in middle school and high school, but you know, come time to go to college, definitely wasn't on the table anymore. To be quite honest, I had to hustle quite a bit through college, usually juggling even 2 or 3 jobs at some point to be able to afford to do something like that. And at that point, running just became, you know, a hobby, or, you know, something that if I could get an hour or two a week to do, I felt pretty grateful for. But sort of left running for quite some years, signing up for marathons here and there. And it really wasn't until kind of coming out of, you know, being in college for over 12 years, pursuing all these degrees and having a really stable job, that I've been able to have the privilege to start ultra running. And that's because I think ultra running specifically is such a privileged sport, primarily because the amount of time that you need to really participate in something like this. Even me as a, you know, a hobbyist runner, I spend 10 or 15 hours a week right now running. And for most people in the world, and for most of my life, that was just never on the table, for many reasons. And if I reflect on the reasons, you know, for myself, it's very systematic, right? It's the same barriers that I honestly encountered in pursuing higher education, right? And in all of that education that I had, and I've studied at universities in, you know, U.S., also across in Europe, studying climate science, nobody ever taught me really the root causes of climate change. We always, as scientists, are trained to understand, you know, the scientific aspects of like, why is it happening? Yeah, we have to remove CO2. But then when we look at the actual impacts of climate change on like communities, that's when we need to start understanding these root causes. And something I try to talk about at events like these is, you know, colonialism and capitalism. Like those are the root causes of climate change. It's not just the CO2 going in the air. It's these really uncomfortable topics that I don't think we really name in these public forums. It's almost like we're a little scared to name the beasts and address them. But I think it's really important. And if I reflect on my own ways of thinking, I started off by saying I took this very individualistic view of like, how can I have the most change? And even that perspective is sort of the influence of how capitalism, colonialism has infiltrated our society. It makes us feel very much like reductionist thinking, like we are just individuals and not really part of this bigger ecosystem. But we always are. And I can make a ton of analogies to my research. And in my field, I deal with Earth observations and specifically looking and using satellite imagery for like hydrology or agriculture applications. And even in science, like we've become very siloed. And there's a reason for that. It's because it's much easier conceptually to think of a single plant. It's really hard to understand dynamics at an ecosystem level. But like other lessons we can learn in agriculture is like diversity is so important, and diversity makes ecosystems thrive and be very productive. And so when I see communities that are very not diverse in something like trail running, I can pull lessons from, this sort of ancient knowledge of like, no, like actually the more diverse the space, the better we thrive, like the better we learn. And we have to change, this mindset that it's just individuals. It really is community. It really is figuring out what is our niche and how does that play into a bigger community effort of actually having change. And yeah, I'm like very grateful to have met you at this time. And I really think Footprints, is sort of trying to touch on that and really getting at that community aspect. But I know you've had pros and cons and struggles and wins. And yeah, if you want to talk about maybe Footprints' journey in this.
Yeah, and so like I mentioned earlier, when we started Footprints, my original idea was like, we'll get climate scientists to talk about climate change, and then people will be educated and they'll fix climate change or something. But we quickly realized that, for one, climate science is very complicated. You can only learn so much in a week, really. And so we kind of shifted to focusing on more like business practices. How do you get your community to take an action with you? How do you, form a movement and communicate these things? But ultimately, many of the first projects focused on kind of these conventional focuses on climate change. How do we remove CO2 from the atmosphere? How do we stop driving so much? How do we do this and that? And what this actually led to was at our most recent camp in 2023, we actually created some real harm for some of our participants because we invited several of our participants and mentors were people of color. And it turned out, and this is what I mean, I've been going through a very big learning process ever since then. But what I've learned was that we were presenting a narrative that had a lot of overtones of white saviorism. We were not acknowledging that some people of color don't feel safe in certain social situations that I would never even consider unsafe because of the privilege that I have. And, several of these people brought these concerns to us, and we had some really hard conversations. And it was really hard to acknowledge that, despite my best intentions, I had actually created harm in this space. And nevertheless, I feel like these people really held us accountable in a way that's helped us grow. And so we put a pause on a lot of the things we were doing. We reorganized our organization. We invited a lot of people, such as yourself, to join the board of directors. We reviewed and changed our mission statement, vision, and values to reflect a greater focus on climate justice rather than just climate change. Climate justice acknowledging, like you said, that climate change is more of a symptom and the root causes are colonialism and capitalism. And if we really want to address these in a systemic way, we're going to have to address these root causes. And a big part of that is just acknowledging that I'm probably not the best person to be teaching these subjects. And so we've been really reaching out to people who are more capable and more able to do it, to communicate these subjects and to lead in these issues. And so it's been really an honor to work with you as well as the many other people working with Footprints. And I hope, we're still at this growth period. I mean, we always will be, but I really hope that Footprints can be seen as like we were held accountable and we were able to move forward. And we'll never be done with this work, but I think it's still worth doing as long as we're willing to acknowledge our failures and move forward in a productive way. Because now I think we can really work with the right people and have the right leadership to promote projects that do address these root causes. And I hope that we can see the results for that. It's going to be fun to find out. I don't know. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, the key word I think you're using right now is accountability. And I think in an environment or sort of state of society when it's pretty easy to jump and cancel things. And And honestly, it's pretty easy as me as, a minority woman to sort of judge, something like footprints easily, right? Of just like, oh, this is a bunch of, white guys trying to do their best and falling short. I think it's really important for us to find a meeting ground, and exactly what you said, to grow past. And we are human and we're going to make mistakes, and we don't want to cancel this, you know something that we both think is very worthwhile, right, and a good source of community for a lot of people. And I think it's a lesson in learning grace for each other, having that same grace within ourselves, right? Like even myself, yes, my family is Puerto Rican, but I identify both as, being part of the oppressed population and the oppressor. Like, I still am growing up in Western society. I also have certain privileges. And if I can't, have that grace for myself and inability to extend it to other people or other things like footprints, like we all lose. So yeah, I'm really excited to see where we can grow together. I think that's just so fundamental. And we need each other to be able to do this. Like, we need both perspectives. You as a professional athlete have an incredible platform that you can leverage. Myself as, a scientist, like, coming together, we are absolutely better for it. And I'm hoping that we see this like continued collaborations in footprints. So.
Thank you so much. It means a lot, and it's really exciting. And I hope that any of you who are interested in being a part of this journey and learning more about what we're doing and getting involved, you can think about joining us this fall. We're having our camp in Craftsbury, Vermont at the end of September. Brianna is going to be one of our mentors guiding your projects. We also have 5 other really amazing people from a whole bunch of different backgrounds. And what we want Footprints to represent is this imperfect but always hard work moving forward for these issues, and trying to acknowledge our own mistakes, but also acknowledging that, like, together we can accomplish really incredible things. And so we're going to hold a lot of grace for each other. We're going to work really hard, and we're going to use our platforms for good. Thanks so much, everybody.